On today's show, we discussed it last week, but the Giannis news cycle is in full swing. And is this something that should bother us? We're going to get into the Giannis conversation once again. Team USA no longer playing for gold. What went wrong this morning against Germany? TyTy Washington, we discussed the signing with the Bucks, but I want to ask Frank, why do the Bucks want TyTy Washington? What are they thinking with this signing as a two-way player? And then if we get time at the end, the founder of the Woodlands, Christian Wood, now playing for the Los Angeles Lakers. Have we got time to talk about Christian Wood? There is too much to get through today, so let's get started.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Bucks. I'm Kane Pittman. You can see and hear me on this show and also find my work over at ESPN alongside me, the founder of brewhoop.com and longtime voice of the podcast, Frank Madden, for today's episode that's brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. That's the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Week 1 of the NFL, the Packers and the Bears, I believe it is. That's off the top of my head. Big NFL guy over here. So we're going to talk about that. But we thank everyone for making Locked On Bucks your first watch or first listen when you get up in the morning. And it's interesting. We've gone through this phase over the last couple of weeks where we haven't been doing the daily shows as we try and ease our way back into the regular season. But it feels like every time we get together, there is enough news to discuss through. So we appreciate the support. Drop a like, a comment, subscribe, turn the notifications on, and you'll know when the next show drops. And we are ramping up towards the start of preseason in under a month, and then the regular season not too far away from that. So we appreciate the support from everyone on Locked On Bucks. Let's dive straight into the Giannis stuff. So we discussed the article in the New York Times last week and what it means and do we really care about it. I was certainly of the opinion that, to me, I like the idea of the Bucks organization being put under pressure. But one of the points that you did flag is, well, that's one part of it, and I think that makes sense. But you're also going to turn on every single NBA show, every single podcast, and everyone's going to be talking about Giannis and essentially Giannis potentially leaving the Bucks. How have you viewed the news cycle over the last 7, 8, 9 days?
Well, I mean, I think it's been like 2 weeks since like the story first dropped, and the day after it dropped, I did the Bucks season outlook for the Dunked On podcast with Nate Duncan, and I said, well, I guess we should start with that, right? And so we talked a bit about that, and I don't think, listening to like the podcast I usually listen to, like Hoop Collective, Windhorse, Bontemps, McMahon on ESPN, Zach Lowe, of course. Zach just came back this week and kind of offered his thoughts on it. Obviously, I talked to Nate about it. And then, Mark Stein was talking about it as well on his pod. And I don't think people are being sensationalist too much, but I mean, people are treating this like a big deal. And I think, as Bucks fans, like you can say like, well, it's the news media, it's ESPN kind of making way more out of this than they should, or, it's going to be, this is like first take stuff just to kind of, spur the photoshopping of Giannis and to, pick your favorite big city, big market team. But I think the thing that I come back and this is, I think what's different about this time versus certainly 2020, which is the last time it was obviously at this rate of discussion and kind of reached this level. But to me, this is the first time where I look at it as like, Giannis is creating this, Giannis is feeding this, right? And it was interesting, we talked about it, obviously, that a lot of it was not surprising, right? Like we didn't expect him to sign an extension this fall. To some extent, it's probably good that he just like says like, hey, it doesn't make sense to do an extension this fall. So like, we're not even going to like, we don't even need to think about it. Cause that obviously would have been probably question one on media day for him if it didn't get addressed prior to that. But kind of the additional comments that went beyond that, and we kind of were joking. It's like, well, Giannis, you really don't need to be harping on this stuff all that much. Like, okay, you can put pressure on the team without putting him on blast. And it's interesting, the thing that Nate asked me about, and people have sort of speculated a little about the comments about, sort of like implying, you can almost interpret some of the comments about, people sacrificing, being away from their families. It's like, it's like, kind of reading about that again, was asked the question of like, oh, like who is that directed at someone? Like what was that about? And I think the answer is I don't think anybody knows for sure, except maybe Giannis and the people in his innermost orbit. It may have been just sort of a throwaway line, or maybe there is something to it. But I think regardless, there is something a little bit different this time than last time, and part of that is the good news is Giannis has won a championship, so he's not facing the existential pressure that he was in 2020, where his whole validation as a superstar was resting on him winning a championship. He's done that. He's proven it here. But we also saw him make comments to the effect of like, well, he has done it now. He will always be, Milwaukee will always be his city, his team, etc. So, that can work against you if it feels like to him now that it's sort of like, well, mission accomplished, and now maybe I want to try something different. So, I don't think it's worth being alarmist about it. But I think the other big thing that's different now is just the age of the team and the window that's ahead of them. And I think, and we've sort of joked about it, right? That it's like, it's sort of like the next couple of years or bust. And that they're kind of now just like everything's going to be year to year with Giannis from here on out. And so I think all that still holds. I do think it's interesting, Zach Lowe said this was like the biggest news. I think Zach made somebody comment to the effect that this was essentially the biggest news of the offseason, the idea that Giannis could be potentially available in a year or could be looking to go elsewhere in a year. Mark Stein was, saying like, oh, well, the top three, like kind of most noteworthy media days are going to be Portland with Dame and Philly with Harden and Giannis in Milwaukee. And I was kind of like, well, wait a minute. Like, on the one hand, he's part of that's because Giannis is just better than those guys. That was part of his argument. But like, part of me is also like, he's not asking for a trade. He's not demanding a trade like those guys. Like, let's like kind of be a little bit measured about what's actually happening here. So anyway, long story short, if you're a Bucks fan, I get it. You're probably sick of us even talking about it now. But this time around, like, Giannis is feeding this, and I'm just, I think media day is going to be notable because it's going to be curious to see to what extent does he double down on it? Does he seek to kind of stem maybe some of the continual speculation that's inevitable to happen all year? Because I think that's the annoying thing to me if I'm, on either a Bucks teammate, a Bucks coach, whatever. It's sort of like, yeah, Giannis, you're right. You're not wrong in anything you said, but we don't need you kind of shining the light on that the pressure's on for us to win a championship or you're going to leave, right? Like that's not really productive pressure to me. And so again, I don't think anybody's going to show up to, media day and be mad about Giannis or whatever, or something like that. But it definitely, it raises the stakes for this season. And it does, I think, change the temperature a bit around the team in the grand scheme of the universe, because if the media is always asking about something, then it will, it's going to be out there. And so, anytime the Bucks go on a 3-game losing streak, or if there's any incidents, or, if Adrian Griffin looks like he's having some problems as a first-time head coach, people are going to seize on that, and they're going to start, again, going to the rumor mill and kind of asking the question. So yeah, I think it's now kind of ball is in Giannis's court to see what he says on media day. Would he actually skip media day? I kind of doubt that. I think we'll probably get a dad joke, and maybe he'll just try to kind of tamp down a little bit of the speculation a little bit. But we'll see. Maybe he'll double down. But either way, I think this amps up not just the pressure on the franchise, which maybe is what he was looking to do, but it also amps up the pressure on himself, and I think shines a light on what he's done since winning a championship and what he's going to do this year. So not like super pleasant in the ways that we would have wanted. But I think that's just going to be the reality of this coming season. And for the sake of everybody, hopefully the Bucks start well and Giannis is rip-roaring ready to go and plays at, his usual highest level to start the season. And there's no kind of drama early on, because certainly that, if there is, then it certainly won't do anything to kind of slow down any of those types of speculations and questioning.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that that's how you've read it, because I don't really see it that way, mostly because if you were talking to me about pressure on Giannis and pressure on the organization, it was significantly ramped up a few years ago when he hadn't won a title. And he was asked at every single media conference, and he just refused to talk about it. And to me, if I go back to that time, like if you just keep pushing it away and saying, I'm not talking about it, then it's almost like, well, why? And then we saw the same storylines anyway. So I think if he says this and he puts the pressure on the Bucks, I don't really care about that. Fine. They should feel under pressure either way. That's certainly the way I've felt about it. But I would imagine that Giannis, as you pointed to, he's going to be at media day. They're going to ask him about it. He's going to say that he doesn't want to talk about it. Then you'll just continue to walk through the same stuff because historically, that's how he's handled these questions in the past. I don't know whether things change. Once you do win a title, then you probably do have the entitlement and the ability to say stuff like he said in that New York Times article. But I also wonder, he's a pretty smart guy. I think generally he says stuff and he knows like what the reaction will be or what comes from that. But at the same time, I don't know whether it was intentional. I don't know. I mean, I'm not really sure how to feel about that. But I don't think, I don't think that the storylines or the angles or the pressure or certainly the external will Giannis leave Milwaukee, I think it would have been there anyway. Maybe they'll just continue to put up some of those quotes, but does that really matter? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's not going to go away unless he makes it go away. And the only way to definitively make it go away is by signing an extension. And obviously, we don't expect that to happen. He's come out and said that wouldn't happen until as early as next summer. So,
but do you think it would have been there anyway? It would have been there anyway, right?
He's feeding the bears, though. And again, I would lean towards the fact that he's not doing this accidentally. Again, maybe some of the phrasing like around the teammate sacrificing was maybe some of that clunky and not like necessarily the way he intended, like perhaps, right? But that's also, I think, why him being asked again is going to be interesting just to see, like, does he try to frame anything differently? Does he just say like, guys, this is it. We're not talking about it anymore. Talk to me after the season is done. Maybe that will be the tact he takes. But even if he says that, obviously there's going to be the continued discussion about like, okay, well, the Bucks are, 19 and 11 and 4th in the East right now. Does that impact Giannis's, like, what does that say about Giannis's kind of the Bucks' ability to contend long-term and continue to build around Giannis? Because that's really that's really the substantive kind of issue here. Like if the Bucks, Chris Middleton and Drew Holiday were 28 years old, then I don't think you'd be hearing anywhere near the same degree of noise. But Giannis saying this stuff with the fact that this core is aging and the ongoing questions of like, okay, like, are they still at the same level they were a couple years ago when they won a championship? That part is fair. And that's the part that obviously I think if you're a Bucks fan, you probably like, it's kind of the most frustrating, not frustrating, but the part maybe you don't want to think about so much. But that's the reality. It's hard to say you're just going to win 55 to 60 games for a decade straight and contend every year. I mean that unless you're like the Spurs with their big three, like it's not just generally the way things happen. And so Bucks have had a great run, and now it's just like how can they extend it? And honestly, like a large kind of question beyond that is just like can you roll over? But I think that's, to be honest, a question more for a year from now than it is necessarily. Let's see how some of these young guys, if they show anything this coming year. Let's see how much the aging curve is catching up with the veterans. And again, hopefully you get positive signs on both those fronts this year. But again, there's not a natural sort of succession line for Giannis's supporting cast at this point. And I think that's really like, if you kind of take all the noise away, that's what I think the kind of key question is facing the team.
No question. And we've discussed it last free agency. What is next summer going to look like? Who knows at this point in time, or certainly the one perhaps two years from now, I think when those contracts sort of run out. So look, the Bucks are in a fascinating position. And as we pointed to, Giannis is a very smart guy. He totally understands that as well. If everything falls apart and this roster is looking awful in 12 months or 24 months time, it's probably not looking good for the Bucks. But let us know, are you absolutely sick of the Giannis news cycle already? I would suggest it's not going to go away. Perhaps we won't talk about it every single episode, but it is going to be something that's going to follow this team. And certainly if you're someone like us that enjoys watching Giannis play, it's not pleasant to think about any type of situation where he isn't in a Bucks roster. But speaking of the guys that are coming through, TyTy Washington, I haven't spoken to you about the first-round pick from last year, so we're going to get to that next because I'm curious about what the Bucks actually think that he can potentially be, or if there was any thoughts, desires, meaning to this signing on a two-way contract. So we'll get to that next after we talk about FanDuel. And it is week one of the NFL, and you can get ready for the NFL season with incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Plus, all customers who bet $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Now is the best time to join FanDuel. The app is easy to use, and you can bet on everything from spreads to player props and more. Packers and Bears this weekend. How about touchdown scorers, anytime touchdown scorer? Let me throw out the Jordan Love plus 750. This is the start of a new era, plus 750, juicy odds. Maybe that's something that interests you there, but check it all out at FanDuel. FanDuel.com/lockedon to kick off the NFL season with an offer you won't want to miss. That's FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. We can get into this pretty quickly. So TyTy Washington, I mentioned this when I did the podcast with Justin last week. I picked him in the Locked On draft leading into that year. And when the Bucks didn't draft TyTy Washington, and obviously very happy with Marjon Beauchamp, I wouldn't have predicted that he was going to be on a two-way contract for the Bucks 12 months later. So any general thoughts on TyTy Washington first? But I was just thinking about it today. And because of the guard situation we've discussed so much, what do you think the Bucks view when they see a guy like this? It's just value on a two-way contract from a first rounder last year and take a swing at the fences? Or are they like, look, we actually positionally really need some guy. He's got talent. He was a first-round pick last year. Maybe we think he can play straight away.
Yeah, I think, if this was the Bud Bucks, I would look at, the weird depth they have at point guard. I would not say like, oh, well, you only got Drew Holiday, who's like, you could call a point guard. So that must mean that, hey, randomly Lindell Wigginton or TyTy Washington, or as being like the only like nominal point guards otherwise on the roster, like, oh, one of them has to play. We know Bud was comfortable not playing a traditional point guard, finding other ways to do it. With Adrian Griffin, we don't know. We do know that the Toronto Raptors often played without a traditional point guard, given that really it was like Fred VanVleet was the only kind of lead guard that played significant minutes for them the last couple of years. So I don't know that Adrian Griffin is looking at Lindell Wigginton and TyTy Washington and saying that like, well, one of those guys is going to have to play 10 to 15 minutes per game. I certainly wouldn't bet on them necessarily, either of them necessarily playing consistently. But we talked a lot this summer about, really young player development. Is so much of this is just like bites at the apple, right? Like you got your portfolio of dudes and you just collect some and you do your best to try to develop them, do your best to do your homework, get talent in the door, try to make the most of that talent. New staff coming in, will they be better or worse than the previous group? Remember Hawks University, everyone was so excited about player development and what Bud and his staff were going to do. And, again, they didn't have a whole lot to work with and they didn't produce a whole lot in terms of young player development that we saw in Milwaukee. So we'll see if Adrian Griffin and his staff have better luck. But again, it's just find more guys that have talent, have pedigree, and fit obviously is part of it as well. If you play a position that you have a need at, obviously that's only going to help your ability to potentially break through. And if you can actually play, it means, you're going to have a much better chance of actually, getting some reps with real leverage and with the best players on the floor. So is TyTy Washington, like, how good of a prospect is he? Look, at this point, I think it's, a coin flip is probably very charitable. I would say you have definitely worse than a coin flip's odds of him kind of turning into like an NBA rotation player. But I mean, let's say it's like, 10 to 15% chance even, right? Probably low for an NBA rotation player, especially given that he's a guy that was just a first round pick a year ago. I mean, again, individually, yeah, that's not necessarily great odds, but you add him with Marjon Beauchamp and Andre Jackson and Chris Livingston. Again, it's just about like, let's just put all these guys in the mix. Let's figure out, hopefully you can get one, maybe two of those guys to really hit and be guys that you want to build with, not around, but build with over the next couple of years. And the upside with TyTy is, he's only a year out. So, let's just say he stays on that two-way contract this year. If they make a trade, open a roster spot, you could potentially convert him if you really like what you saw. But regardless, he'll just be a restricted free agent next summer. So unlike a Malik Beasley, who's, been around a while, if Malik Beasley comes in on a cheap deal as he did, if he's awesome, you're going to have a really hard time re-signing him next summer because of the limitations they have around the cap. The good news is with a guy like TyTy, he's a restricted free agent. And so again, like I think there's, even if he looked pretty good, I think the odds of him getting like some huge contract offer are much lower. But even if he did, you'd have, limitations on what teams could offer him. And you'd have an avenue to retain him in ways that you wouldn't if a guy was, had been in the league more than 3 years, was not going to be a restricted free agent. So, those are kind of problems for next summer. You hope you have that problem that TyTy Washington is so good that, other people want him. But we'll see. I mean, I think, look, I was doing, kind of watching some scouting report videos, reading up on him as you did as well. Not like an electric athlete, but pretty good size. I think has the tools to be a solid NBA defender. Good in between games, seems to have a good kind of sense for running pick and roll. And has been certainly in G League last year. He shot a ton of threes, was like a mid-30 shooter, so more of a volume guy than necessarily like a lights out guy. But again, there's kind of like the raw materials there to be a guy that can shoot threes and pressure a defense that way and get to your shots. But again, maybe more mid-range, not that explosive athlete that can get to the rim. So again, I think there's something there, that could potentially translate into, at least maybe a backup point guard at the NBA level. Again, hard to expect more than that at this point. Let's see what he's like in the preseason. Let's see if he can make a claim on trying to get some minutes. Obviously, didn't sufficiently impress in Houston. Very crowded situation, certainly there as well as far as the young talent. So, I don't know how much you make of that, but certainly last year was not, a year of where you built up a lot of credit necessarily. So we'll see. But again, this was, I think from his perspective, certainly an interesting opportunity to come to a very good team that just has this weird lack of depth at his position. So I'm sure that was part of the calculus for him and his agent thinking about why Milwaukee. But, how realistic is it he actually plays it for a bit? And again, I'm not banking on anything, but at a minimum, he has a chance. And it was funny in one of the scouting videos I watch, Hoop Intellect. I forget his name, but he does. He's on the Dunked On pod every year as well. He does really detailed scouting report videos. The kind of reminds me of guys that he included in his tape, and this was from his draft year 2022. This is not recent, but coming out of college, it was George Hill and Emmanuel Quickley. I'm a huge Quickley fan, so I was like, oh, cool. I like to see that. I don't think he's as quickly as necessarily, but George Hill, obviously our dear old friend. If you could get, even age 31, 32, George Hill at that, with that level of investment, in a two-way contract, get like late stage George Hill, you'd obviously be very pleased with that. So yeah, no downside. And honestly, we'll also see. I mean, like Lyndall Wigginton is still on a two-way. Along with Amari Moore, you've got three kind of ball handlers there. Again, you don't have anybody on the main roster other than Drew that fits into that category, but curious, maybe Lyndall Wigginton doesn't survive camp. Who knows? Maybe if TyTy Washington doesn't play well, maybe he doesn't, come out of camp either. Everything's still a little bit tenuous, but yeah, worthy dice roll, and I'm all for the Bucks doing more of these, right? And there's not a lot of downside, especially with a two-way contract. It's not like we're even talking about a full roster spot. So yeah, very pleasant surprise move late in August, and we'll see what he has to offer here once camp starts.
It's kind of when you think about the situations where the Bucks kind of really should take a swing on a guy at this position because it's a position of need. But as you mentioned, it was crowded backcourt in Houston with lots of young players. And then OKC's like, well, we've got 20 guys on our roster. They're all young. We've got plenty of guards. We don't really need you either. So, maybe just through the circumstance, this ends up being a pretty nice slice of luck, I guess, for the Milwaukee Bucks. Certainly, fingers crossed that's the case if you're a Milwaukee fan. Anyway, got to get to the chairman of the Woodlands next. Christian Wood going to the Lakers. Is there still stock? From Frank Madden in Christian Wood.
I was happy he didn't go to Miami. It would have been painful for me as someone who liked Christian Wood back when he was a Bucks summer leaguer and a Bucks preseason All-Star. It would have hurt me if he went to Miami and Spo turned him into a useful guy that actually was able to give real minutes in the playoffs, especially against the Bucks or something. So I was happy he stayed out west. I think it's a bit of a weird combination for him to go to LA. They've got a lot of big men alongside Anthony Davis. Talked this week about Anthony Davis wanting to play less five, especially during the regular season. I don't know that Christian Wood helps that equation. So curious to see what sort of that means. But obviously Christian's a talented guy. I at least thought when we were having some of these discussions about would the Bucks make a trade and would Bobby Portis have to be in it? I think the only avenue where I could have made any sort of argument for bringing Christian Wood back to Milwaukee would have been if you had used Bobby in a trade because of his salary and obviously him having value, and then you would have had basically only the Lopi as your centers. In that scenario, I would still have me with my soft spot for Christian Wood. All the intangible stuff, questions aside, I would have said, hey, that could be actually kind of an interesting, Bobby replacement. I don't think he has nearly the locker room vibes of a Bobby Portis, who obviously has been a super likable guy for fans, for his teammates as well. That I think would be definitely a question. But, look, Christian's been around a number of the core guys here, principally Giannis. I think he developed a good relationship with Giannis to the point that Giannis really has gone after him when they've played each other. But honestly, you can see how he patterns his game after Giannis in various ways. And I mean, he said that when he was coming out of the draft, he was probably the first guy. I think this is 2016, maybe coming out of the draft. He was probably the first guy who was saying that he was patterning himself off of Giannis, because Giannis was 21 years old at the time, not quite, the super duper all-star we know now. So yeah, as a Bobby Portis, minimum replacement after a trade, I could have seen the argument. But with the way the Bucks are constructed, I was not, holding out hope that Christian Wood was going to come back to Milwaukee. But I don't know. We'll see. I mean, obviously he has not fared well when he's had kind of these bigger roles as far as impacting winning. So hopefully that impacts, hopefully he doesn't help the Lakers either, I guess, in that regard. But really talented guy. So it's just always the question with him is can he kind of make it add up and actually translate into something useful on the court. So we'll see from LA. We can watch from a distance and not feel a whole lot of pressure.
It's crazy to think about because, as you pointed to, this guy is so talented. You look at the numbers, and last year he gets you 16-7 for his career per 36. He's 23-10, 61% true shooting. The numbers just look great, and yet and we understand the defensive stuff hard to read on a box score, but he's going to be his 8th team in 8 seasons in the NBA. He just keeps bouncing around, and you can understand why teams are seduced and they go, okay, let's bring in Christian Wood. But when I was watching TV this week and everyone's like, this is the bargain of the offseason, this is unbelievable. It's well, he's been on 8 teams in 8 years. Why is he just there? Why is he there despite the numbers? So he continues to be a fascinating case. But maybe eventually he does get to a situation where it makes sense for him. But I'm sure that there are still Bucks fans out there. Let us know in the YouTube comments how you feel about Christian Wood, because I think, as I said, as the chairman of the Woodlands, I think there are still some paid-up members that enjoy watching him play. And let's face it, he's entertaining. He's an entertaining guy to watch. So hopefully it works out for him at the Lakers, although that feels a little bit weird to say. But maybe Darvin Ham, someone that knows him well.
Yeah, Darvin knows him. Darvin knows him. So bring
him in, and we'll see if it works out. Look, we're not going to get to Team USA today, but let's face it, Canada for bronze on Sunday morning. I don't know how many people are getting up at 4:30 in the morning or whatever time that game is, Eastern time, to watch Canada and the US. But unfortunate, no gold medal for Bobby. But he has a chance for bronze. We'll see what happens there.
Yeah.
Have you been plugged into the World Cup, Frank?
No. I mean,
Come on.
if Giannis was playing, I would have been all about it. I think as people who listen to us a lot, my international basketball interests always pretty much go with like the Bucks players, regardless of what country they're from. We're so good at basketball as Americans. Like we've won so much stuff. Like I don't know. Like I don't
Bad day
sweat
to make
the
that
Team
claim.
USA.
Jeez.
Yeah, I know. But I don't really care. So I was bummed for Bobby. I would have loved to see Bobby win
Yeah.
a World Cup. I was really happy when Drew and Chris won the gold medal in 2021. I was definitely invested in that just because of those guys. But like, look, like, you know, I know people have said like this is a really likable team. Other than Bobby, whatever. I don't like those guys that much. Like, whatever, they're fine. I have no negative thoughts about Tyrese Halliburton or whatever, but I don't particularly care all that much. And it just kind of underscores how talented the rest of the world has become basketball wise. And like Canada losing, like Bill Simmons was doing a podcast with Ariel Helwani, the MMA guy, and they were like, Bill Simmons was like, oh, it's going to be USA Canada on Sunday, and it was like, just assuming they were both going to win their games, and lo and behold, it is USA Canada, but not in the game that people expected. How did you feel about your Boomers, and did they qualify for the Olympics, or where are they? Do they have to qualify next summer, or did they make it automatically through?
No, Australia qualified, so they've got a little bit of a loophole because you just have to be the highest ranked team from Oceania.
Oh, and Oceania,
which is like you have to just finish higher than New Zealand, So it's
New Zealand.
So, by the way, Australia did need a little bit of luck because it came down to Australia was advancing to the second round, but they were in a really not a good situation at that point in time. And Greece was playing New Zealand. And if New Zealand beat Greece, which they were up by double digits in the first half, then Australia would have been, maybe flirting with going through the qualifying tournament. But then Greece got the job done, got New Zealand out of there, and Australia's qualified for the Olympics. So
wait, I should know this, but is Greece qualified for the Olympics, or do they have to play next summer?
No, they're not qualified. So the Europe qualifiers just absolute powerhouse. I mean, 6 of the last 8 teams in the World Cup were from Europe, so it's going to be tough.
It's very bizarre how the World Cup has 20 more teams than the Olympics. 32 versus 12. It just creates such a strange dynamic as far as just getting in, and then obviously for someone like Giannis now having to figure out like, okay, like does he play in some qualifying mini tournament, in July or whatever next summer to help Greece just to get to the Olympics. Even if you're looking at it strictly from a Bucks fan perspective, it's kind of like, so he could have either a really long summer if he helped them do that, or he could have a very short summer and just not play at all for Greece, given that they don't have that automatic ride through to the Olympics. But I don't know. I don't know if people noticed, but Giannis's knee injury was basically Giannis's knee injury came out because the Greek Federation seemed to be like annoyed that he may not play with them. I don't know how much Giannis would have appreciated that. I'm kind of curious. Giannis was not in with the team at any point, supporting them. Obviously he's going to support his brother and all that, but I am a little bit curious how everything went down. I don't think they wanted his knee surgery getting out, and basically it got out to the Greek press, and then the U.S. kind of press caught on, or they basically ran with it. So yeah, I guess it's kind of like a little random thing to kind of keep an eye on, and curious if that may impact Giannis's interest in kind of working with that federation next summer. Obviously, can't quite question his patriotism, but yeah, hey, international basketball gives us at least something to talk about here during the summer. Keeps you employed, King. Keeps you talking, and you got to hang out in lovely Connecticut. We should be clear, you're wearing a Connecticut Sun shirt right now, not a Phoenix Suns shirt right now. So you're supporting the Connecticut Sun, now your favorite WNBA team, I guess.
Yep, went to a game the other night. Beck Allen, Australian star, colleague, been doing great stuff on the broadcast and playing for the Connecticut Sun. So the playoffs not far around the corner. So that's my team, I guess. I bought some merch the other day, and interesting venue, I'll say that. But it was a lot of fun overall. So yep, big fan of the merch.
Do they play at Mohegan Sun? They
certainly do.
The casino? Yeah, okay. I've never been to Mohegan Sun, but living in Boston, I was always aware of the casino in it's like around Hartford, I guess somewhere around there, right?
No, it's right out in the middle of nowhere. It took us from Hartford, where I am now, basically. It took like an hour and 15 minutes to get there. And by the way, the casino though, inside, like with old timber and colorful carpet and just old school as anything. I thought I was back in Milwaukee at Potawatomi. It is very similar, but a little bit bigger. I will say that. But interesting venue for an arena.
You can tell that I have not lived in Milwaukee as an adult because I've never been to Potawatomi. I don't gamble either, so that's part of it. But never been to Potawatomi. Sounds like you have, Kane. So that's one Wisconsin to do that you checked off, which I have not.
Yeah, not a gambler either. As Andrew Gay said on our broadcast today, I wouldn't bet on the sun coming up. But hey, that's. Anyway, we've
kind of some apocalyptic stuff from Australian basketball legend Andrew Gaze. Gazy.
Anyway, if anyone's still listening, we might wrap up this podcast. Hey, enjoy the weekend, though. We will have the FIBA World Cup medal games there. Maybe USA will pick up a bronze over the weekend. And then next week, we'll continue to roll through. So let us know what you thought about today's show. The Giannis stuff, TyTy Washington, continue to talk about that. Are you still invested in Christian Wood? Plenty to think about over the weekend, and we'll catch you all next week.